Welcome to Module 4, Intro to Migration. In the last module, you learned about the issues that geographers and leaders need to consider with regard to population growth. We learned that when populations grow too fast, as in this population pyramid of Nigeria, we see lots of poverty, education, and healthcare issues. We see if you can see that the lower rungs of the pyramid have high numbers, then the population is very young, which means the fertility rate is high. And you see that it has a predominantly high death rate as well, which means that it's not very developed. We also know that if populations are growing too slowly, that there are dependency issues. So this means that the elderly needs to be cared for by the younger working population. And you can see that here because as the population is decreasing and you have fewer and fewer births, when these people become older up into this age group and they're not working anymore, then these younger people are going to have to support them, which is a high dependency ratio for them because that's a lot more people to have to take care of. Also, you know that the fewer children that families have, the more they consume. So that's going to be a strain on the environment. In this module, we're going to explore the ways that countries deal with different types of population issues. And it's a different kind of a population issue. We're talking about the change that occurs in population when people leave your country, as well as when people enter your country from other countries. So, in other words, how does the movement of people in or out of a country create some problems that have to be solved? Now, also, how does it create some opportunities that will actually improve the country and improve its development and the lives of the people? So, our essential question for this module will be, what should the United States population be? What should the United States adopt in terms of a policy on immigration? So as we think about changes in population that are occurring globally, regionally, and in our own backyard as a result of the movement of people, what policies, another way of saying policies is laws and procedures and protocols, what should be considered by our leaders for our country that's in the best interest of our country? And of course, you all are each going to have different perspectives depending on the ideologies that you guys have. So once again, we will take an approach that we are geographers, and it is our role to advise the leaders in our country that make these policies. So think about, what would you advise as you learn in this module. Okay, so to start, we want to make sure that we're using the right words for what we mean to say and that we understand what we're hearing when we hear it. So let's start with the word migration. That's a very general term that can refer to any kind of movement of people from one place to another. So a migrant, if you hear the word migrant, that's anyone who's moving either in or out of their country. It covers it all. The word immigration specifically refers to the movement of people into your country. So if you're talking about immigrants, you're referring to the people that have come from another country and they live in your country. Okay? Emigration is the opposite. So when you emigrate, you have left the country. So when we refer to anybody who is emigrating from our country, they are leaving and moving to another country. So let's talk about a few other terms that you were introduced to when you saw the first video in this playlist. Push factors. Those are economic and political, cultural, and environmental reasons why someone would want to leave their country or emigrate. Okay, so it's pushing them out. Pull factors are going to refer to any of the ESPN reasons why people would want to come in. So that's your draw that we're referring to. Okay, and as governments look for ways to address issues of migration, they can look to address push factors and pull factors. So it may be if you have an issue with a lot of people coming into your country for jobs, then what is it that's causing them to do that? Is that something that's good about your economy? And are these people contributing to your economy? And that's a positive thing? Or is it that there's poverty in their country and they can't afford to live? So that's a push factor that might need to be addressed with some kind of international cooperation. Two things to keep in mind. If you leave by choice, in other words, you could survive in your country where you are, but you choose to leave because you want a better life. I mean, it's fine and you can survive, but you just want better. We refer to that as voluntary migration. If you leave because you have no choice, we're talking about the safety and security of your family. We're talking about survival, food, shelter, basic needs, and you will not survive unless you leave. We call that forced migration. And it's important to distinguish between the two because we're going to be looking at policies, government policies that are going to address issues. And sometimes they're going to need to look at why people are leaving their country and coming into another country. Is it by choice or is it because they don't have a choice? Okay, so when we think about push and pull factors, it is important to think about human psychology. One of my favorite psychologists in terms of developmental psychology is Abraham Maslow, who was a developmental psychologist who theorized that humans have needs and that without the most basic of them being met, meaning at this bottom level, if this level is not met, you will never meet the needs that are up here. So unless your physiological needs, meaning your air, your water, your food, your shelter, all of these types of things, the ability to survive, if those needs are not met, if your safety is not met, if you're in danger of losing your life because you're going to be attacked, then you will never be able to be thinking about freedom or education or the desire to become happy in your life. So that's what Maslow's hierarchy of needs are. Now, at this lower level, migration is typically forced. So if you don't have food or water or shelter where you live, then you have no choice. You have to leave because otherwise you will not survive. If there is war and your personal security is being threatened, if there's so much unemployment, there's no job available, which is what you need in order to survive, then you have no choice but to leave. So when we think about forced migration versus voluntary migration, think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and why people would have to leave. Okay, let's look at what's happening where. This chart is from the Pew Research Center, and it shows us the top 25 destinations for migration for migrants. We can see that the orange represents millions of people. Oops, dropped my script. Hang on. The orange represents millions of people who are considered migrants in that specific country. So you can see that in the United States, you have up to 50 million people who have come in currently who are in our country who have come from another country. Okay, this blue represents how that's a percentage of the population. So we can see that while the United States has the highest number of migrants, around 50 million, it is less than 1/5 of the country's total population, as you can see down here. Whereas in the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait, there are fewer migrants, but it's over 3/4 of each country's population, over 75% of that country's population. So that should give you a little bit of perspective in terms of the resources available in each of those countries. This map shows shows the places that have the highest number of people immigrating or coming in. And this can be seen in the blue countries where the darkest blue places have the highest number of people coming in. We can also see places with negative migration Those are going to be your orange places. So you can see that those places are losing people. So those are the places where people are actually leaving. Okay, so the question is, in terms of migration patterns, over the last 5 years, where does it look like most people are going? So those are the places that have the highest pull factors. Then you want to look at the places that are orange or dark, really, really dark orange or burnt sienna. And those are the places that have the highest push factors. People are leaving. And so we want to examine that and analyze what is going on in those countries that's causing people to need to leave. And thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Are their needs being met? Are they leaving voluntarily, or are they leaving by force? Okay, let's talk about government policy. So governments make policies, and a policy is another way of saying like a law or a protocol or a declaration of something that you're going to do, something that they're going to do procedurally consistently over time. So governments make these policies in order to manage the movement of people. They may want to make policies to prevent people from leaving. They may need to make policies to reduce the number of people coming in, or they might want more innovation. They might want more educated people coming into their country. So they might want to create policies that encourage people to come in and get jobs and contribute to our economy. So some of this could be to sustain their own resources. So this is an idea that we explored in Module 3. Will we have enough food for everybody? Will we have enough shelter, water, jobs, healthcare, education? Will we be putting our country at risk of an attack if we let our enemies come in? So these are all the considerations that governments make when they create immigration policy. As we consider immigration policy, I'm going to move myself up here, we need to see and understand that there is a spectrum. Okay, it's not black and white, it's not either or, but we can see that that a government might fall anywhere along this spectrum with regard to its policies. On one end of the spectrum, we can see that there is something called an open door policy, which is making it easy for immigrants to enter the country. A restrictive policy is when all of their laws and procedures and declarations make it difficult or impossible, possibly, for immigrants to enter their country. So I'm going to move myself up here. When a country has mostly restrictive policies, making it difficult for immigrants to come in, it's probably and usually because there is a threat of crime or an attack, or they're concerned that they don't have enough resources to sustain people's standard of living. Or it could be because of something called xenophobia, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. If a country has an open door policy, it likely values something we refer to as multiculturalism, or the belief that countries and places are better the more cultures, the more different cultures are celebrated. It may also mean they have a cornucopian perspective. So in other words, they're not concerned about running low on resources because they believe they will always be able to innovate and make up for what is needed. So they'll always have agricultural innovations. They'll always have housing innovations. They'll be able to make room for everyone. And at some point, the population will sustain itself as a result. Most countries are not on the extreme. So you usually do not see countries over on this end or on this end. You usually see them somewhere in the middle. Okay, so what that generally means is that they might be taking some measures that are allowing immigrants to come in, and they might be taking some measures that are cautious or careful about how they let them in or what kinds of screening they do to make sure that they're not going to hurt the country and that it meets their national interest. Okay, let's talk about this word because we mentioned it before. Xenophobia is a word that means a fear, a disdain, or distaste, if you will, dislike, or a suspicion of people who come from the outside. So a lot of times people will say it means fear of foreigners. Okay, and it's a really strong motivator for restrictive immigration policy. The general belief that people from other places are not to be trusted or are to be looked at as inferior can be really powerful, and it can be really, really contagious and influential. So it's important to look at the reasons why xenophobia exists and to determine if the fear is actually rational. Is there a reason to fear people who are coming from the outside? Or are some of those fears not really logical or not really rational, and they're just kind of happening because humans have a tendency to protect themselves and be afraid and to kind of stereotype? So before we start thinking about what kinds of policies governments should be making about immigration, we are going to examine 2 case studies coming up in this playlist. One of them is going to be in the Middle East. So we're going to be looking at push and pull factors in the Middle East, and predominantly in Europe is going to be where there's going to be the pull factors and the push factors in the Middle East. And then Central America, what push factors are happening in Central America that are causing people to leave? Now, most people, you saw in one of the maps that we looked at that the highest number of people are actually leaving the Middle East, not necessarily Central America, but because Central America is our neighbor and we see a lot of immigration into our country as a result of push factors in Central America, that's why we're going to use that as a case study. So we will talk about all of these things in the rest of this playlist.